Bitcoin is still that once in a lifetime trade for a couple of brave companies or money managers. It's actually like a massive opportunity. It's just a
Right.
matter of time before some smart people figure that out. Right now, MicroStrategy obviously was the pioneer in that strategy, and Square is sort of the second to follow suit. It's a risky, I think most corporate boardrooms would say, oh, that's a risky strategy for your treasury. But there will be a time not too soon where it'll be irresponsible not to put some amount of your US dollars and other fiat into something like Bitcoin. Because we started to think about what the government's been doing with the US dollar for the past decade or so, and traditional sort of stores of value and hedges. And then the pandemic hit, and kind of around like March in Europe, and we sort of stopped writing and put it on pause to kind of see what was going to happen, and then restarted writing it sometime this summer once the dust had settled and we kind of had a sense of what the government had done in response. So interestingly enough, it wasn't actually a pandemic related piece. It was really a sort of a piece on the debt reckoning that we think is coming over the next 5-10 years. And then why we thought Bitcoin made a lot of sense for people who sort of want to hedge against inflation. So really the story got way more interesting sort of because of the pandemic. We thought it was still compelling what the US government has been doing to the dollar pre-pandemic, but even more so now. So the stage is really set for what we think is likely, inflation, and Bitcoin's really the best way to combat that. And I think that that's the future that we see. It's like hard to see perhaps right now. I mean, when we got into Bitcoin, it was this crazy Wild West, scary thing. It's hard to see how that doesn't happen. We've been down this path for decades, and it doesn't matter who's in office in the US, Democrat, Republican, the money printer still goes burr. And the ability to actually raise taxes and lower spending, we've been unable to do that as a country. Like, there no longer is a political party that's like the hard money, tight fiscal party. It doesn't matter. It's sort of like the Fed wags the dog. Whoever wins in November, the money printing will continue. All you need really is a data connection, and then you can send or receive Bitcoin. And I think, if you were to actually like rob the Federal Reserve in Manhattan, you would need, I think, something like 12 or 13 dump trucks to move that gold and get it off the island. And then you'd be loading it into like 747s and flying it to wherever. It's really hard to move a lot of gold. It's really heavy. And when things get really bad, apocalyptically bad, it's much easier to move Bitcoin around. It's hard to move gold. And if you think of like the lockdowns in the pandemic, when people were literally sheltering in place, you're not moving gold during that time period. The other thing is, it's still an incredible trade. I mean, it's not just a store of value trade, it's still early. And Bitcoin's an emergent store of value. So the next couple of companies or large hedge fund managers that take massive positions and actually talk about it and tell the world, hey, we took a $100 million position or a $500 million position in Bitcoin. That's like a trade of the court, could be the trade of the century. Kind of like the George Soros trade, breaking the pound. He sort of saw what was happening there. And a lot of people, they say, oh, a $12,000 Bitcoin, that sounds expensive. But, it's so early. It's like buying, Amazon in the early 2000s, in the knots. And, if we're right, there's a 45x appreciation from 12,000. 12,000 will look incredibly cheap. When people first hear about Bitcoin, it's like, what is this crazy internet money thing? And so what helped us early on was to think about, okay, what's it, sort of analogize a little bit to, and we came up with the gold framework, which is a pretty classic way to understand Bitcoin at this point. So that helped us early on understand like why this was interesting in one way. It's not just internet money, but it's gold 2.0. And then just as a sort of a thought exercise for ourselves, but also it's great to share that with other people, is like, okay, what is Bitcoin and why is it important or relevant to me? And that was really the impetus to, okay, we bought some of our earliest Bitcoin in 2012. How have things changed or not changed since then? Is Bitcoin, is gold itself still an interesting asset class or investment for people? And that was sort of the impetus to look back at like the last 10 years since the beginning of Bitcoin, which was born in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis. And the pseudonymous creator Satoshi talked about the problems with the existing system, how much trust is required to place into bankers, government officials, central bankers, and just governments in general, and how that had led us astray and led us down so many times. That's what's so brilliant about crypto and Bitcoin, is that there isn't 12 people behind a curtain making decisions for the entire the currency of the US dollar in the economy. If you ever invented money from scratch today, let's say, or you did it again, no one would say it's a great idea to put all this power in the hands of 12 people who make decisions behind closed doors that we can't see. You'd never set it up that way. You'd set it up like Bitcoin or Ethereum or some other crypto decentralized protocol. So there's a lot of sort of case law rulings and regulatory frameworks that I think are pretty well established at this point that Bitcoin fits into on both the state and the federal level in the US. So I feel good about the US, and I think the same is true for the UK and the EU. There's going to be parts of the world where Bitcoin is banned and outlawed, and those are likely the parts where they're most fearful of the technology, and they're trying to control capital, and so it's pretty obvious what's going on there, and that's actually I think a good thing. It sort of validates the thesis when places like Venezuela are trying to crack down on things like Bitcoin. But I guess going back to like an earlier part of the conversation, like if you grew up in a high inflation environment, the way you think about money is totally different than someone growing up in the US. And so I think, in places like Argentina, you might purchase a motorcycle to store value in addition to wanting to ride it. And when you lose 25, 30, 40% of the value of your money on a yearly annual basis, that's traumatizing, and it changes the way you think. And we have had the US has been relatively well managed. Now there's people that will tell you that it's still horribly managed, and it's the US dollar's lost something like 95% of its value since, let's say, the 70s or so, and gold has increased 26 times or more. But on a relative scale, it's sort of the best of the worst.